Hey y'all, here are OS Reviews. Today we're taking a revisited look at the Samsung Galaxy S10e here in 2023. This device was released back in March of 2019, making it now 4 years old. Crazy how fast time flies. However, as we've seen time and time again, an older flagship can still be a great choice as a budget Android smartphone, now that you can find this thing for around $100 when shopping around. Now, I will point out that a couple months back, we did a revisited review on the Samsung Galaxy S10 Lite, which, as the name implies, is another phone in this S10 family, but this is the largest S10 in terms of footprint, with its gigantic 6.7-inch screen next to the 5.8-inch panel on the S10e. After this point, unfortunately, Samsung really no longer made compact phones with flagship-level specs, especially if you have smaller hands. This can be a good choice. As we've talked about in past videos, I am just a huge fan of compact smartphones in general. We've checked out devices from Sony, and in contrast, the S10e is a more modern device in terms of the screen-to-body ratio. It's really like a older 5-inch smartphone, in fact, which had an 16:9 aspect ratio, but they just fit a larger display into it. But despite the small size, you're not really missing anything in terms of performance. It has the same Snapdragon 855 processor, it's a 7nm architecture, which remains relatively energy efficient, octa-core, and in terms of other specs, on the back we had access to a dual camera array, comprising of a 12-megapixel primary lens with OIS and dual aperture adjustment. This was a trick borrowed from the Galaxy S9 days, where depending on your environment, the camera will physically let in different amounts of light using a small shutter. The only thing missing compared to, say, the larger variants of the phone would be a telephoto zoom lens, but this is still very capable with, again, the wide angle and the primary shooter. The phone's construction quality is also top-notch. It's a glass sandwich on the front and the back. The panel on this white version in particular shimmers as it catches the light. With that being said, one advantage of that S10 Lite was it was released a couple months after the S10e and the regular S10s, so it actually has support for Android 13 in terms of software upgrades, versus the S10e only has official software update until Android 12 or One UI 4.1. So no longer quite the newest, but there is still nothing in terms of apps and software that you can't run on the phone. Otherwise, the right-hand spine housed a power key that also served as a fingerprint scanner instead of being under the display, but is still very responsive and easy to use. This phone does have dual speakers as well, one on the bottom and also one on the earpiece to give you that stereo effect, and they're also tuned by AKG and have pretty decent quality. There is USB Type-C for charging and data syncing. The phone also supports Qi wireless charging like most Samsung Galaxy S devices, and there is a conventional 3.5mm headphone jack, yet another relic of yesteryear that we just no longer see, unfortunately, on newer Android smartphones. Finally, the left-hand spine housed a Bixby button, which was not the most useful thing in the world, but it is what it is, and there's also a volume rocker. And just a closer look at this 5.8-inch HDR10 compatible AMOLED screen, it is full HD, but just like devices from its day, it doesn't have support for ultra-fast refresh rate quite yet, so it's stuck on 60 Hz instead of having 90 or 120 like on more recent devices. However, the slightly smaller screen size, coupled with the still very fast Snapdragon 855, means that the phone still feels quite fluid and fast as you're swiping around. The phone also comes with either 6 or 8 GB of RAM by picking between the 128 or 256 GB memory configurations, which is still more than sufficient, I'd say, for casual usage. Like most AMOLED screens, colors are very vibrant and punchy. It has true blacks because no pixels are turned on unless colors are being shown, and so it can conserve on power if you're using it in a dark theme or dark mode. This was also when hole punch selfie cameras started hitting the market for the first time, and back then there was a little bit more of optimization in terms of a lot of different wallpapers that you could creatively apply to kind of mask it from view. As aforementioned, that fingerprint scanner is also super fast and responsive, and it also serves double duty as allowing you to create gestures for the drag-down notification tray. Otherwise, users of any Samsung Galaxy phone will feel right at home in terms of the software experience, in which Samsung, of course, goes with a whole kitchen sink approach that has been slightly toned down ever since the introduction of the One UI. However, there's still plenty of what we call bloatware in a way, but Samsung exclusive apps. Some of you guys may find utility in these tools, especially if you're in the whole Samsung ecosystem. But instead of using just the stock Google apps, Samsung, of course, famously includes their versions of almost every single tool, including calculators and utility tools. It's not bad. In fact, quite a few utility extras can be helpful, including a built-in sound recorder as well as Samsung Music app. Drag down notification tray also allows us to still access all of the controls, including various wireless options, including support for GPS, Bluetooth 5.0 for wireless peripherals, has NFC for contactless payment. All those things work as expected. The OLED display also has benefits, including an always-on display mode, which I have to say are pretty nice extras if you want to play around with it. Doesn't consume too much power either, since it is using just a black background. It does have also support for wireless power sharing. You're able to put something like a pair of wireless buds onto the back surface here, and it will act as a charger, although still a very slippery one unless you have a skin. So here we have the phone connected to a monitor, and you can see it transforms into kind of a pseudo laptop or desktop with a taskbar here at the bottom for more easily navigating around. And although it's not going to be able to run true desktop apps like macOS or Windows, it still is definitely helpful, and you can use it kind of like a Chromebook, and you're able to get a slightly more comfortable, for example, web browsing experience with different tabs at the top. On the left-hand screen, you also have access to what is essentially Samsung's version of the Google News feed, but you can always get rid of this screen by turning off that Samsung free feature if you don't really want to leverage it. Now, if we hop into the camera interface and performance next, we continue with the abundance of different software tricks that you can play around with. It's quite easy to switch back and forth between the wide-angle lens and the primary camera. Options that we can choose down below here include video recording. You can shoot up to 4K. Under additional settings, you can find a pro mode for changing things like ISO, white balance, as well as a night mode that does similar tricks as you would find on a Pixel or an iPhone by increasing the exposure time. You can even record both portrait bokehs and portrait video that will blur the background as you are recording the video, which is pretty neat. The camera still performs very well, especially for a device of its age. You're able to get very vibrant looking colors, which is a staple on Samsung phones. Maybe not the most realistic in the world, but definitely brings more life and energy to the photos, especially with greens. They just pop out. Although maybe not quite to the same level of what a Pixel or an equivalent iPhone might be able to deliver, I would still say that this thing is definitely not shabby at all, especially now that you can find it at a budget price of around $100. It still is super quick to snap images, and in most conditions, you're able to get very beautiful looking results out of it. Definitely performs better than most new phones that you can find in this price range. And a few final examples here. Even pinks are captured quite well, which tends to be an area that is sometimes difficult for smaller sensors to capture properly, but it's still well exposed. And if you're not a fan of the current color science, you can always try installing a third-party camera app like Gcam, which might further improve the performance of certain night shots, for example, and get you access to features like astrophotography, which are not built in by default. So it's one of the other benefits of picking up a more well-known and popular Android flagship of yesteryear is there is more community support. In terms of web browsing, as aforementioned, the Snapdragon 855 is still more than sufficient for simple tasks like this. We can even render the full desktop version of the site, and you can just see how quickly the page snaps into focus. This thing does have Wi-Fi 6 in addition to, again, 4G LTE, so it doesn't quite have 5G connectivity, but the antenna reception strength has been excellent, and it has no issues in terms of staying connected. One of the other hidden benefits of having a flagship phone of yesteryear is that details like the haptic vibration motor are also handled very well. With that being said, no product is perfect, and areas of slight weakness here would be if you are picking up a S10e now, you have to keep in mind that batteries will degrade, and the phone here never had a massive cell to begin with at 3,100 milliamp hours. This is not going to be really an endurance champion unless you're using the phone more sporadically, coupled with the battery degradation. But it's not too bad either, especially if you are just using it for simple web browsing, occasional snaps here and there. I was able to still get through about a day's usage before needing to top up. One of the other remarks would be, even though the processor here is very quick and snappy for a compact phone, I did find that it got occasionally warm when it was installing software updates or doing things a little bit more intensive, such as gaming for, say, longer than an hour, primarily on the bezel section here on the frame. It's good in the sense that it is dissipating the heat and it doesn't really thermal throttle. It remains still well performing as you're pressing it hard, but definitely gets a little bit noticeably warmer than on some comparable similar 855 phones I've tried out. Otherwise though, as aforementioned, all the basics when it comes to making calls, communication are still handled flawlessly on this phone, and there's no issues with the various built-in microphones for ambient noise reduction. As you are talking to folks, even in challenging conditions, they said they were able to hear my voice really without any issues. And here's a demo of video playback on this device, as well as the built-in speakers. We're going to crank up the volume here. With amazing contrast in colors and also ample brightness, even if you are in outdoor environments, this is still an excellent panel for multimedia consumption. Again, makes this an excellent choice even if you're using it for watching some TV shows here and there. It can still more than hold up without breaking a sweat. If I had to critique something, it would be, even though the speakers sound relatively full for a phone, that is, having even a touch of bass, which is excellent, again helped by the AKG collaboration, they will distort a little bit at higher volume levels. As aforementioned, the A55 I think is still more than sufficient for the majority of folks out there, unless you are into, say, competitive gaming and you must have the latest and greatest power in the world. But something like this, which was once a flagship, still has a pretty powerful GPU, and there is absolutely no title from the store that you can't run and play on here, including heavier ones such as Asphalt, PUBG, can all work really without any problems. Minecraft, no issues there, let alone less demanding games that you can also see will just fly on this phone, super quick to load, quick to download titles, and really no stuttering at all. The only downside, of course, just being the slightly smaller battery means that you aren't going to be able to game continuously for overly long sessions. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on revisited review of the Samsung Galaxy S10e here in 2023, and I come to a similar conclusion that we often do when it comes to these older used flagships, is they can be an excellent value when you are shopping around. Instead of only looking at the newest models and considering something, say, in the mid-tier category, if that's what your budget allows, always remember to check out some older flagships as well, because areas like build quality as well as performance more times than not will still hold up really well, such as the example here. Extras like DeX support, as well as excellent connectivity, speed, and performance. I think this is still a, again, very good choice here in 2023. You can check out additional details if you are interested in the links down below. For now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been a revisited look at the Samsung Galaxy S10e.